Is the grass always greener on the other side of the yard? Movies like Over the Hedge honestly may think, you never know, really. Is the grass greener? That's what they say. Is it Bermuda grass? Is it dark green grass that you see while you're on a fishing trip in Canada? Is it the grass that a high school team who just won state, they got rid of their grass, so they're putting in turf on their field? Is it that kind of grass? Is the grass always greener on the other side of the pasture? That's the question of the day. Is life always better whenever you move on to a new city or whenever you move on to a new job? Right now I'm not necessarily sure that's always the case. You may wake up for the new job and realize, man, I don't want to go to work at 5 or 4 in the morning. Or maybe you get up for the new job and you wake up at 5 in the morning and, you don't start till 10 p.m. at night. I'm not sure what you would have been doing to wake up at 5 in the morning, considering most of the analytics for this podcast, at least, say that I'm hitting that 18 to 35 mark. So most of y'all probably don't wake up till 7:30, 8 a.m. anyway. But beyond what we're talking about, beyond wake-up calls, beyond, having that cup of joe in the morning, I guess we're here to talk about football. So let's start, man. Ben Johnson is going to the Bears. If you don't know anything about Ben Johnson, he was the offensive coordinator for the Lions. Essentially what that means is whenever Lions go boom, boom, touchdown, that is because Ben Johnson was hopping on that Johnson and doing his job. Ben actually helped the Lions score the most points out of any team this season, even more than the Chiefs with Patrick Mahomes and all the refs they did. It's really not important whatever happens with the refs and the Chiefs. People are always going to get mad about the Chiefs and the refs, but alas, here we are. That's just the world we live in, unfortunately. Honestly, the Chiefs and the refs kind of remind me of a celebrity relationship. It's almost like an abusive relationship, but the refs also kind of get something out of it at the end of the day, because whenever you do help the Chiefs, ultimately they are going to get to where they're winning. And so with that, if the refs help them win, they're going to also keep reffing more Chiefs games, and they're also going to keep winning by being able to ref games like the Super Bowl. So unfortunately, it's just kind of a toxic cycle, really, that, you just keep going into. It's kind of like the environment and windmills, like every time, they always say, we need more sustainable energy. But then you put up a windmill and, it kills a family of birds. And you never know what that family of birds was doing. Maybe that family of birds, maybe the dad was trying to take them on a vacation. Maybe they said, all right, we're going to hop in the air and we're flying to Cancun. But, as they're flying over the Oklahoma Panhandle, the little birdie Joe being a girl, Joe just gets absolutely clapped by that unfortunate windmill placement. So yeah, Ben Johnson is a Bear now. Sorry, I think I said a Lions earlier, but no, he's going to the Bears. He'll be the new head coach there. He'll be coaching Caleb Williams, who was the number 1 overall pick in the NFL last year. With Caleb Williams, though, that's kind of an interesting story because a lot of the other quarterbacks, they played pretty well, but Caleb Williams, he was just kind of having a rough go at it this year. At one point he ended up losing like 10 games straight, which is pretty unfortunate. I mean, the sports I played growing up were baseball, basketball, and mascot, and even as a mascot, I never lost 10 games straight in a row. And I was in a suit the whole time, a furry suit nonetheless. So if that doesn't make me qualified to talk about sports, I don't know what does. But with Caleb Williams and Ben Johnson, they should be able to lock in pretty hard. In the press conference earlier this week, Ben Johnson essentially went along the lines of, hey, I'm not just copying and pasting my old presentation for my new class. Essentially, I'm actually going to break down the entire PowerPoint. I may even make a new PowerPoint, and it'll be full of pictures of Caleb Williams. Whether he paints his nails in those pictures, that's up to further interpretation. Honestly, people trash on Caleb Williams a lot for painting his nails. And personally, I don't have my nails painted at the time. I already have really feminine hands in the first place, so that's just my own problem. But Caleb Williams is a number 1 overall pick in the draft. If you are considering his nail polish as one of the defining characteristics about that dude, that's probably your own problem. But then again, I also did just go on a tangent about Caleb Williams, nail polish on his nails. And the fact that I know this much about a dude who's only 2 years older than me, but making $25 million, what does that say about me? What does that say about the current media these days? But anyways, that Ben Johnson and Caleb Williams connection should be pretty nice, considering they are both on the offensive side of the ball. We're still waiting on some of how that defense is going to look, but Chicago has generally been known for defense through most of the franchise's history. They literally had a player called the Refrigerator. Well, he wasn't necessarily called the Refrigerator, but whenever your star player at some point is essentially nicknamed the Fridge, if there's anything I don't want to run into, it's a fridge. And even as a college student, when my fridge is empty most of the time, I don't really enjoy running into it for the most part. Not that that happens all that often, but you can never count out an average Tuesday night. Ben Johnson is going to the Bears. His co-coordinator in Detroit, Aaron Glenn, he's heading to the Jets after they fired head coach Robert Saleh this past season. And honestly, the firing did not really make that much sense to me. I get that the Jets want to be in a position of winning now that they have a quarterback in Aaron Rodgers. But Aaron Rodgers, that dude, whenever you take that much ayahuasca, I imagine it chills you out to a certain extent, but what result does that have on the throwing capability? I imagine that Aaron Rodgers probably has some pretty profound thoughts on whatever, he wants to explore in the future. Maybe that's politics. It's probably a crappy podcast, but we'll just have to see about that whenever it comes about. But yeah, Aaron Rodgers is old. He even brought an expensive wide receiver from Las Vegas. This isn't the only time a receiver from Las Vegas has gotten into an expensive situation. But at least this situation is a little more positive for the rest of society. But with that being said, what does Aaron Glenn do going forward as the head coach of the New York Jets? Essentially, this is a cursed franchise from everything I've been able to tell. And that's coming from somebody who has rooted for the Cowboys for their whole life. So, yeah, the Jets have a pretty rough go at it to a certain extent. And maybe Aaron Glenn will be the one who's able to right the ship. We will see about that in the future, though. So good luck to Aaron Glenn out there. Essentially, the way I kind of see this job going is, I'm going to put it kind of in corny high school terms. Essentially, there is, let's say he's a sophomore. Aaron Glenn is the sophomore in this situation. He had a pretty solid academic year, and, he was the backup quarterback who, he may start on varsity next year, but we never know. But the high school coach is essentially Aaron Glenn, and essentially this high school coach Probably an alcoholic, probably lets his 6-year-old son come to practice a little bit too much, but the school can't fire him because if the school fired him, the school would have to close. So Aaron Glenn is kind of walking into that kind of situation, and not to mention that Aaron Glenn just broke up essentially with, in the story, a girlfriend. More to come on how attractive and how valuable that girlfriend ends up being, but eventually we'll see depending on how Detroit plays this upcoming year. Also, just breaking this morning, Pete Carroll is heading to the Raiders. Pete Carroll is known for having won a college football national championship with the USC Trojans. He won a Super Bowl with the Seattle Seahawks. He almost won 2 Super Bowls if he had just had Marshawn Lynch run it on the goal line. But we don't really need to rehash that unless I get a comment saying we do need to rehash that, because I'm always looking for content at this point in my life. Voice crack, oh boy. But essentially, 70-something-year-old Pete Carroll is coming to the Raiders. In case you didn't know, in case you haven't heard on every media sports publication ever, Tom Brady is currently the minority owner of the Raiders. That honestly doesn't really mean all that much, except for the fact that he now just has a lot more influence on the organization. But he is also a commentator for the organization. So essentially, it's like he is the biggest person alive, and he's just about big enough to be able to stretch from the tip of California to New York. But we're not able quite yet to see if he's able to stretch his toes actually into the oceans of both sides, and the oceans of both sides would be being an effective minority owner and being a solid commentator. So we'll see if that is able to happen. Honestly, from what I've seen so far, Tom Brady is a pretty adequate commentator. His smile does kind of remind me of Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho movie, but that's a story for another day, and this is not a film analysis podcast. As much metaphors as I like to use, we don't really need to explore that further. But with Pete Carroll coming to the Raiders, it does present some opportunities at quarterback position for them. So to kind of aid that quarterback position, they have Brock Bowers, and Brock Bowers just set multiple records. He set most receptions as a rookie overall. That's including wide receivers as well, so that's a very impressive stat. And then also, he set the record for most receptions in a season as a Raiders player as a rookie. So if Pete Carroll can honestly just find a quarterback who can just can spin the pill to this dude, or shoot, even hand it off to this dude, they might have a half-decent offense that can score more than 22 points a game. We're still in the weeds on that, as it still is only January 24th, and the Raiders are not currently in the playoffs. So we'll have to see how that goes. But for the guy who could sling that pill to Brock Bowers, we could be looking at Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson was the quarterback for the Steelers this year, and honestly, he played pretty well up until about the last 5 games of the season. Generally with the Steelers, that happens every year, so I'm not 100% sure if that's Russell Wilson's fault, but we'll be able to see in the coming future with that, if they decide to re-sign him or if he decides to go to a place like Las Vegas. Him and Pete Carroll did have kind of a precarious relationship. Essentially, it wasn't necessarily like a high school breakup. It was really more of like a man and woman divorcing, or man and man, or woman and woman, depending on how you feel about it. But for this purpose, we'll say it was a man and a woman divorcing. Really, I'll kind of say that Russell Wilson honestly got a pretty bad end of the stick for the most part. He ended up going to Denver, who he actually beat in a Super Bowl at some point, which was pretty interesting. Funnily enough, on that story, I actually have a friend who is quite the interesting character, who actually is a Broncos fan and donated money to his charity of choice every time the Seahawks lost. So Broncos fans weren't really happy about that in the first place, and then he kind of, wet his britches pooped the sheets, if you will, in Denver before actually playing a half-decent season in Pittsburgh. So we're really still trying to see whether he's able to do anything. We'll see coming up on that. But the Raiders are also potentially opening themselves up to a link up with Shedeur Sanders. Tom Brady, who again is the minority owner of the Raiders, he actually trained Shedeur Sanders in high school. And, as long as there's a relationship between a Sanders family member, and somebody professional, that's probably going to be exploited somehow. While Shedeur did tease going to the New York Giants, which I could definitely see happening as well, that Vegas link up is definitely something to think about considering the proximity of Vegas to Colorado. If Deion Sanders does not get hired by the Cowboys, which probably won't happen, Shedeur probably would likely be happy with being closer to his father, not in like a weird way, but they definitely, Deion has great ways to influence his sons, and he wants to continue being able to do that because, nepotism honestly is pretty beneficial for the people who are able to use it. That's why Shedeur Sanders is probably as good at football as he is. Not to degrade Shedeur Sanders as an athlete. I believe Shedeur Sanders is a great athlete. That film is pretty telling. But it does also help when your dad is Deion Sanders. Not in a bad way. Not in a bad way. Brian Cornelius Schottenheimer is the lead candidate for the Cowboys head coaching position. Brian, Shoddy. Shoddy is his name. We could be seeing a guy named Shoddy in Dallas. So that's just interesting in and of itself. Personally, I would have loved to see Deion Sanders be the head coaching candidate of the future. But, are Dallas fans ever truly going to get what they want? I mean, trying to predict Jerry Jones actually doing something a Cowboys fan would want is kind of like trying to predict what the weather's going to be like, whether you wake up and you feel like you're rested enough, whether there's something that's going on in politics that's going to accept you or not. That's what trying to predict the Cowboys is like. It's the only organization that's run the way it is, and it's also the only team in the NFC that hasn't made an NFC championship since 1995. So that's a story in and of itself, even though the Cowboys somehow managed to have solid regular seasons every year. So that just is what it is, to say the least. But before we go, I would like to actually hear from a Cowboys fan. So we are going to hear from our resident Cowboys fan, Alex Nod, who has decided to call into the show. And additionally, if you would like to call into the show, please contact me on Instagram, YouTube. Shoot, if you find my phone number, send me a video on there, and we will feature you on the podcast. So as long as I keep getting more people to be on the podcast, I'll keep talking about it. So let's go ahead and start with Alex Nod's clips.
Hello, this is your local pessimistic Cowboys fan here.
Same.
And I just briefly want to go over this season. Briefly. So to start, Dak Prescott, hurt. CeeDee Lamb, hurt. Zach Martin, hurt.
Okay, you can't do anything about injuries at the end of the day. I don't know where you're going with this, but is Dak Prescott really the guy anyways? Honestly, the really big thing with Dak Prescott's injury is the fact that he got paid $60 million a year this past year, and instead of throwing touchdowns, he was proposing to his girlfriend on golf courses. So that's kind of in and of itself. The CeeDee Lamb injury you can't be as mad about, because with CeeDee, he did play through that injury, and I had him in fantasy, and that dude went off. I mean, he wasn't the number one overall player in fantasy, kind of like he was last year, but that dude still had solid production, even whenever that dude's shoulder was essentially ruptured. Like, he would fall on the field and it would literally look like his shoulder was about to go out of place. But somehow, I guess, he may have just stuck it back in itself and decided to go from there. But that is what it is. Zach Martin, honestly, that's a valid concern, considering no good team is ever going to make it to the Super Bowl without a solid O-line. Generally, a good quarterback is really what's going to get you to the Super Bowl. But the Cowboys can't quite figure that out yet. So that's just kind of a problem in and of itself.
Jerry Jones, probably working with Satan. This entire season was a disappointment.
Honestly, I probably do agree. Well, I don't want to be blasphemous. I don't know that Jerry Jones is working with Satan, but I also do subscribe to the belief that as long as Jerry Jones is the owner/operator of the Cowboys, I don't think an NFC championship appearance is even in the cards. I don't know what it is about the Cowboys with Jerry at the top, but ever since the 90s, they just cannot happen to do anything in the playoffs. The Cowboys' inability to go at least to the NFC championship, it's honestly kind of like seeing like a 6-year-old being put on a basketball team with 10-year-olds. And, the 6-year-old isn't even that bad of a player. Like, he can at least shoot layups. He's left-handed, so honestly, he kind of has an advantage every now and then. But during practice scrimmages, since the 10-year-olds are, in 5th grade and they generally know a little bit more about life than the 6-year-old, every time they see the 6-year-old shoot, they just block him. They block the crap out of him. And honestly, they kind of let him play for the most part. Like, he gets at least like 6 to 8 points through the third quarter. And considering how low scoring, child basketball games are, that's actually pretty solid. But as soon as the fourth quarter comes, those 10-year-olds, as soon as they see that 6-year-old, honestly, they don't even block him cleanly. They just knock him to the ground so hard that whenever he gets up to shoot free throws, he honestly just can't even get it far enough to go into the basket. So that's kind of what Jerry Jones is, a 6-year-old who can't do anything as soon as the fourth quarter starts. So, yeah, I don't necessarily think he's working with Satan, but as soon as it hits crunch time for the dude, he becomes a McDonald's fry cook. And honestly, that's being nice to McDonald's fry cooks.
All of our stars are hurt.
Can't do anything
Barely
about that.
made the playoffs. Couldn't even get a top 10 pick with the waste of the season. No, because we would shoot ourselves in the foot and win every time. Yeah.
I don't know if we would shoot ourselves in the foot every time and win. That Eagles game was pretty rough. Washington beat the Cowboys last game of the season. It definitely ended very poorly. I do agree with you for the frustration on beating Tampa Bay, honestly. As a football fan, I feel like everybody should love Baker Mayfield. That dude's a GOAT, and we made him sad in his home state. So honestly, I can accept your opinion on that.
That's the Dallas Cowboy culture everyone knows and loves, right? It hurts.
It does hurt.
I don't know what else to say.
Well, you got 2 more minutes of stuff you're saying.
I used to have joy. But that's it. I don't have joy. This team has taken my joy. It's plain as day. I don't know how else to explain it. On Sundays, I used to cry in the shower full of hope and optimism, but now it's just a depressed cry.
Honestly, generally, I also cry in the showers, but if you're crying in the showers for the Cowboys, A, you're probably a Cowboys fan, but B, man, we got to extend our reach. We got to find God or something. I don't know if it's because we keep calling the Cowboys God's team, but I wonder if maybe stopping that phrase would help a little bit. That probably is considered blasphemous. I bet if Jesus pulled up right now, he probably wouldn't want me calling the Dallas Cowboys America's. Well, no, he'd probably be fine. I'm not going to talk about Jesus anymore. I'm not going to talk about Jesus anymore on this podcast. Let's just continue.
I don't feel much anymore, and frankly, it's just kind of sad. Every day is sad. I'm an OU fan too, so my weekends just
that's a horrible way to live.
I don't know what else to say. It sucks. It really sucks.
It does suck.
And I would say maybe when I was a kid, I would always say, next year we'll get them. This will be our year. No.
And that's the thing with the Cowboys. It never is the Cowboys' year, seemingly. Honestly, last year was the only year in my history that I can ever actually genuinely believing that the Cowboys could make it their year, and then they get blown out by one of their biggest rivals. In their home stadium, nonetheless, and they were the first number 2 seed ever to lose to the number 7 seed. I don't even know how you do that, but they were able to make it work.
No. The name of the game currently is, can you beat Patrick Mahomes? And no, the Dallas Cowboys cannot beat Patrick Mahomes. And frankly, I don't believe any other team in the league can. Anytime one of my buddies comes up to me and is like, oh yeah, that was a pretty good move by XYZ, the Eagles, the Chargers, whatever. No, it's not. Is it enough to beat Patrick Mahomes? I don't think so.
Honestly, at this point, I don't think anything is good enough to beat Patrick Mahomes. And that's not even really a compliment to Patrick Mahomes. I just think whatever the Chiefs have in that organization right now, not only is it crack to the NFL, not only is it crack to the refs, but it's crack to the media ratings as well. So I don't really think we're going to see the Chiefs fall off anytime soon, as long as Patrick Mahomes, Andy Reid, and Travis Kelce are there. And I say as long as Travis Kelce is there too, but Noah Gray is also a star in and of himself. And with Travis Kelce having played for the Chiefs and literally dating Taylor Swift, we are seeing an entire generation of Taylor Swift / Chiefs fans. Before Travis Kelce started dating Taylor Swift, my family group chat is filled with all women cousins. And honestly, they don't really pay much attention to football. But ever since they started dating, somehow magically, my oldest cousin is a Chiefs fan. So that's what we've gotten ourselves into. That's just the way the dominoes have fallen. Whatever philosophical reason you have for that, it probably isn't even adequate enough to explain how the Chiefs are going to have a strong, literally a chokehold on NFL ratings, wins, and refs for the near
I don't
future.
think so. It is. I've been yelling this from the rooftops since the end of last season. I fully expect Patrick Mahomes to three-peat. I don't think
I do too.
there's anything that'll stop him. I think he's going to three-peat. And I honestly expect him to beat Tom Brady in every single major statistical category except rings. And I think that final ring, the ring Brady won against Mahomes at 40, it's going to be the thing that, separates the two, as it should.
See, I disagree. I think Patrick Mahomes is somehow going to find a way to win that many rings just because it would be able to troll all NFL fan bases. I think the NFL thrives on having a villain. I feel like that's one of the main things in college football right now that's actually detracting from... low viewership is an interesting stat in and of itself, but this most recent national championship game had the second lowest viewers in the college football playoff era. That's a whole other can of worms in and of itself, but there's no really major villain in college football right now. But as long as the Chiefs are the villain in the NFL, that's only going to boost ratings, which we saw with Tom Brady, as people will rage watch against Patrick Mahomes. Texans Chiefs had over 30 million viewers, which was more than the college football national championship game. While the NFL is definitely the biggest league in the world, really, we still have to be able to put that in perspective.
And frankly, I kind of care more about that now than the Dallas Cowboys, because I don't know what to say. The Dallas Cowboys are sad, and Jerry Jones just, they
are.
You can hire a coach and the world's best GM, and that can come out of the salary cap, Jerry. You can buy the best money can buy, and you can still have your hand in the cookie jar. You just take
you would think you would
take a breather. That's all anyone wants. We all want to win. We'll give you the credit if we win. Just take a step back, Jerry. It takes a big man to admit when he's wrong. Please.
I'm sure every Dallas Cowboys fan would honestly give Jerry Jones a $100 voucher to go play golf. And if every Dallas Cowboys fan did that, he could play golf for the rest of his days. Somebody just really needs to get this dude into golf.
For half the season, all I was rooting for is the Dallas Cowboys to get Ashton Shinty, but I don't even think we can pick him up. I don't know. The 12th pick, we're just going to get some random O-lineman who's only played the position for 4 years, and he'll end up being a Pro Bowler, but I don't know. But, yeah, it's been a sad season, and I am sad. and I have no joy. That's all.
It has. That's fair. That's very fair. At the end of the day, Cowboys fans are always going to be miserable, and that's just what you get into whenever you become a Cowboys fan. But, every now and then you just got to find a different team to root for. And it sucks. Maybe you go to a different sport. Maybe you go to college ball. Maybe you're watching cricket in the back of your 9 a.m. class on a Tuesday. But we don't always know whether the grass is going to be greener on the other side of the pasture until we actually go see that greener grass. So with that being said, stick with your team. Don't stick with your team. And the NFL doesn't really matter these days. Honestly, I don't think anybody actually keeps track of who is cheering for who whenever you pick an NFL team. College is different because there is that guy that keeps asking people if they actually attended the school that they're cheering for, most namely with Texas and Ohio State. But that's the thing in and of itself. And we're not even going to dive into that can of worms today. Maybe on the next pod. We'll see. But again, thank y'all for watching. If this is your first time listening to the pod, please subscribe on YouTube. Follow us on Instagram. I upload content pretty much daily, whether that's sports updates, weather updates, anything that has to do with being outside and most likely having a ball in your hands. Thank you for listening. If you have any sponsors, please send them my way, and we will see you Saturday.